Welcome to this Vac City VOW Lit Fest. As always, great pleasure to have. And I'll sort of request you to make some opening remarks to give us a frame of reference, and then we can take it further from there.
Thank you so much for having me here. This is the first time I'm doing this, so it's new to me. Just as a frame of reference, of course, you said I'm the flag officer commanding in chief of the Western Naval Command. Of course, I got half of the Navy's resources under my command and a very huge responsibility. Even as we speak, there are a number of ships of the Western Naval Command that are deployed. So we are the implementing arm of any national policy in the ocean, and so obviously these are challenging times for the world. Very challenging times for the region, certainly challenging times for India. People can talk to me about the war. Of course, I don't know very much about the war. This is not our war. We are a neutral country. We are just watching the war like everybody else in the world. But we know that this war has very, very serious implications to our economic well-being, certainly to our energy security. And so, if there's anything that you'd like to know about me, the way I understand it, my job and my contribution to my command's contribution to the energy security and the rest of it, I'll be very happy to do it to answer those questions as well. Srikant, because I normally I don't know if I'm good at these kind of things, but Srikant summons, so we just have to come. So I just come here as some kind of an unwilling participant. So just pardon me if I say something that's somewhat dull and boring, because that's the kind of person I am. But Srikant, let's take on your questions.
So you've got canvas that is vast. How do you fill the colors in it every day?
We've got three commands: the Western Command, the Southern Command, and the Eastern Command. The Southern Command for us is a training command, and training is a very, very important peacetime activity for us. We've got something like 33 or 34 what we call Cat A training establishments. And we did the Southern Naval Command much later in our evolution as a Navy, perhaps in the mid-80s, where we felt that training was too important a discipline to be left to happen by itself. So we wanted it to be headquartered and controlled and overseen by a command. So we did the Southern Naval Command to be a training command. The Western Naval Command and the Eastern Naval Command are operational commands. And if you draw a vertical line through India, through the peninsula, and drop it down straight from Kanyakumari all the way up to Antarctica, everything to the west of that is my operation jurisdiction. It works out to something like 38,000 million square kilometers, but that's huge. That's a huge ocean space that which I don't have to be there every single day of my life or me on my ships. But that is the operation jurisdiction, and it's a neat division of responsibility between the Eastern Naval Command and the Western Naval Command. While the Western Naval Command is seen in our own scheme of things as some kind of a more busy command, is simply because of the complexity of the maritime environment. Because throughout our history, we've had Pakistan as as a unfriendly neighbor. We've had a lot of things happening in the Middle East, the Makran coast, the Oman coast, Yemen, South Yemen, the Gulf of Eden, east coast of Africa, other countries. There have been a lot of impoverished populations there. There have been a lot of security hotspots. And so, because of the immediacy of the threats that we face on the Western Command, on the Western Seaboard, the Western Naval Command has been relatively more active. Certainly, it is a historical fact that we have done most of the heavy lifting of all security operations on behalf of the nation for everything. So anytime there's any kind of national security contingency, there's any kind of national security situation, the Western Naval Command mobilizes, because throughout our history there has been a pattern. It is almost inevitable for us to have been able to trace it down to either Pakistan or Pakistan proxies or something of that kind. So we have always mobilized. We always mobilize, even in anticipation of something that happens there. Much of our trade, all of us know this, about more than 90% of our trade by volume and more than 70% by value is seaborne. And so we are extremely trade dependent for our economic well-being, and much of the trade comes from sea. So keeping the sea lanes safe, keeping the sea lanes open, keeping the international environment in the ocean safe, stable, and somewhat predictable is something very important for the normal transaction of commerce. So stability, security, predictability happens. At least in our experience, these kind of things cannot be taken for granted. We don't assume these things simply because we want them. We have to ensure that these things happen, and we ensure that it happen by doing the hard work. We are deployed there every day. We have units positioned in various vantage points. Because we track developments in the Indian Ocean region, we keep a very high level of what we call maritime domain awareness. It's important for us to know who enters the Indian Ocean region, who exits it, where do they come from, where do they go, which is the last port of call, which is the next port of call, what cargo they carry, who is the cargo meant for, and all of that. We keep track of all of that. And we keep some kind of a transparency of every person, every ship present in the Indian Ocean region. It's not easy, and it's not that we do it perfectly, but we do it very, very well. We've got a bunch of people doing exactly that. Maintaining maritime domain awareness is a 24 by 7 by 365 job, and we deploy a lot of resources to know exactly what's happening. Once we do that, it's not very difficult for us to, and also because we keep track of international events, it's not very difficult for us to figure out which might be the hotspots and the potential hotspots or the trouble spots. And we've adopted a philosophy of what we call mission-based deployments. This we did, this adoption of the mission-based deployments predates all the wars of the recent wars. This war, certainly the Russia-Ukraine war, it predates, the Israel-Hamas war, the action of the Houthis in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. It predates all of that. So we know where the choke points are. Choke points, of course, are a fact of life. Geography is the reality of life. We recognize our geography. We keep our ships deployed in various geographical hotspots so that we understand the geography, we understand the happenings there, we understand who's coming, who's going. And so when something does happen, we don't have to go and discover things there. We're already up to speed and we can have to go and act. So all of this happens, in the dull, routine day of everyday life of the Western Naval Command. There are troops, there are ships, there are submarines, there are aircraft. We do that every single day. We compile a picture so that we have a very good understanding of what is happening, so that if something does happen and the nation does require us to react, we are there, we are up to speed, we know exactly what needs to be done. In all of that, I think the biggest concern that I have as an operations commander is that I got to make sure that my ships, submarines, aircraft, special forces are all maintained at some good level of operation readiness so that when the call comes, we don't have to waste a lot of time getting ready. If you're not already pre-conditioned there, then we're certainly ready to go. And we can position ourselves in a hotspot in a matter of a day or so. So I think maintaining, recognizing A, the responsibility that is vested on us, B, recognizing the dynamics of the geopolitical environment, the geostrategic environment, the geo-economic environment in our vicinity, trying to recognize if there's a hotspot somewhere and being able to pre-position there is something that we do every day of our lives. And we've got a very good record of responding directly to all kinds of international situations on time. There are two things that describe us. We like to describe ourselves the way we see ourselves, which as a Navy, one of course we call ourselves a preferred security partner, which actually means that there are plenty of smaller Indian Ocean states that have the same kind of concerns in the oceans or similar concerns as us. We recognize that because the seas are contiguous, what is happening there will take no time to happen here tomorrow. They have the same concerns, but they don't have the capacities or the capabilities to contribute to security. So they look for help. And when they do look for help, we want them to look towards us rather than looking towards somebody else. So we like to position ourselves as a preferred security partner. And we hope that because of the combination of the hard part and the soft part, that we represent the regions, they will come to us rather than going to somebody else. And the second element of our self-image that we have is that we like to be the first responder, which means, we track any kind of contingencies, any kind of, HADR tasks, any kind of, national calamities. And we like to pre-position ourselves with the material that matters to people, so that if something does happen and somebody is looking for help, we are already there in the first responder, so that, we take that responsibility of being a big nation and a relatively big navy in the area to do that. So doing that as well, in a part of our mission set. So we engage with our partner countries every single day. We do everything that Srikant said just now. We show the flag. We engage with them on a daily basis, and we feel that the time to establish good relationships with our partner navies is every single day. So that when the time comes, we don't waste time in getting to know each other. We only can put a face to a name and a name to a face. We just pick up the phone and say, we want this, and we're there. So all of this takes a lot of hard work. Unfortunately, some of this, or maybe all of it, is not done in public there, in public gaze. So, a lot of people don't know about it. And for good reason, the Navy is known as a silent service because whatever we do is well beyond the horizon of the normal human motive on the land. So I think it's occasions like this where we can come out and speak a little about what we do in our daily lives and why it matters to the nation and why it matters to you. So thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here to explain that.
Lovely. So, a lot of young people, the students sitting in the audience, they wonder that if this is your description of a dull routine day, what would an exciting day be like? So let's come to some of that part. I mean, you said lots of things from trade protection to maritime domain awareness to our own self conception of how we see, and of course the geography and what's happening. How geography bears upon things navy. But this has been a rather interesting last few months or last year, and you made a reference to that initially. So you had the Sankalp, and then you had Operation Sindoor when you were the vice chief, and you were watching them from the apex levels, so to say. Operation Sindoor unfold, the Navy was almost, it was up there. And then now you have the crisis, the war that's happening in West Asia, and India, not a party to the war, but since we are concerned about our energy security, having deployed our ship. So, give us a bit of sense of this frisson or excitement, or how is the Navy handling all of this?
That's a great question. What happens at sea? We live in an interconnected world. And the economy of the world is in a way it's interconnected and globalized. Firstly, of course, we recognize that any conflict in this today's interconnected world, it's extremely difficult to keep it contained in the location where it takes place. It's almost certain that places far away will have very serious repercussions because they're an interconnected world. Our economies are interconnected, and so obviously, this war is not our war. This war, we are a neutral country. All the belligerents in this war are friendly countries to us, and we have no stake in this war. Of course, we want this war to end as soon as it can. Our national leadership, our prime minister has gone on record and said several times that obviously this conflict needs to end, and it needs to end through diplomacy and dialogue. But in the meantime, every single day, we've got to make sure that our interests are protected. A war zone itself is a very, very unpredictable zone. We don't know what extent it has. We don't know who's shooting whom. There are a lot of interesting flying all over the place. It's not a very good and conducive environment for international commerce. And that's where ships, they can't sail. In their normal lives, they have an insurance policy. They need to get a war-related war risk insurance premium taken on that, and it's huge. There are a lot of ships that are stuck upstream from the Strait of Hormuz. They need to come to Indian ports, and they need to come out. There are something like 3,000 or 4,000 ships internationally that are stuck there. So if that kind of supply chain disruption is what we are seeing, then clearly it has ramifications for all of us. So these are interesting times, and not just us. There are several like-minded navies that are invested in keeping their presence there in the North Arabian Sea and trying to predict their own interests. Now, of course, the war is being fought from the North Arabian Sea, so there are a lot of belligerents. And so, for us, the challenge is to keep away from the war, stay in the war zone, not interfere with the war, make sure we are protected, make sure our shipping is protected, and engage with the warring people at various levels. I know that the political leadership is engaging with all kinds of bunkers, the belligerents themselves, but certainly several like-minded countries. The Navy at the level much higher than mine is also engaging with a lot of people. But as an operational commander, I'm a soldier. I've got a task. I've got my troops. And my task is to remain present there and just make sure that we can contribute as much as we can to the stability, so that not just our ships and ships that are bound to our port come back, but if any other ship needs a little bit of predictability and stability, we are able to contribute to that as well. We've learned a lot of lessons. If the question is, what lessons have we learned about the war itself? And we've learned a lot of lessons. We're taking them on board. We've been studying the Russia-Ukraine war for several years. It's come to the fifth year now. We've studied the Israel, Hamas war. The tenuous ceasefire there, and we're studying the current Israel-Iran, Israel-US-Iran war as well. So there are a lot of lessons for us to take home, and we can talk about that. But certainly, these are interesting times, and we are engaged. One of us, and it's so dynamic. I mean, every day you see a new change, you see a new frame of reference. We are working in a new context every single day. So just aligning ourselves and adapting to what's happening, is something that is leading us. But we just need to do what we need to do. We don't control much of what happened in the war, but we ought to control what we should, which is our own preparedness, our own ships, submarines, aircraft, and men. And so, as far as I'm concerned, the task somehow, to all of that, the complex range of activities that happen in North Agency, my task is simply to maintain a high level of operation readiness, be present in strength, and be able to respond to the nation's requirement whenever I get it.
Wonderful. Now, you mentioned a very key element, and I think this is what most naval officers automatically do. We talk about protection of trade, protection of our shipping. And one of the possible consequences of this war, at least in India, is that people have become more aware of the maritime domain. It is now being said that people who were not aware of where Mahim Creek is now are aware of the Strait of Hormuz. So at least that kind of maritime geography has. And since you speak about trade protection, I mean, normally it's a very unsexy, very unglamorous thing, but navies do that for a living. Since you mentioned last about lessons and your own gaze as an academic, how India is positioned in the Indian Ocean, talk to us a bit. I mean, here I'm talking to the PhD scholar too. A little bit about geopolitics in this region and how geography both blesses us, but at the same time imposes this huge responsibility upon us.
There is one explicit question and there's an implicit question. Let me answer the implicit question first. I'm one of those guys who doesn't know where Mahim Creek is, but I live in the state of Hormuz every single day of my life. It's simply because I think I don't have the time to go to Mahim Creek, but I have the necessity of looking at the state of Hormuz every day. That, of course, is an aside. Geography is a reality of life, and choke points are the reality of geography. And so, anybody who makes any kind of assessment of the threat perception of international geopolitics needs to first, be cognizant of geography. I mean, geopolitics is not geopolitics without geography, and so geography plays a huge role in whatever nations do. I think the subcontinent itself, the geography is not, in a way described just by the physical features, but it's also described by the people, the populations, the people who came, the rulers, the cultures that have filtered down, generation and generations of people. And of course, now the history, recent history, and also recent history of domination that this region has had by external powers for something like centuries. Certainly, we are seeing a resultant of all of that in the 21st century, where we see a lot of impoverished populations, a lot of war-ravaged populations living, in the littorals of the Indian Ocean region. And so, where there are historical animosities, historical enmities that have not found successful resolution, they've been carried forward for centuries. They have been suppressed somewhat by some, foreign rulers. The foreign ruler wrecked. So some of those conflicts that have been suppressed artificially for centuries, they are finding new life and coming up now. So there is huge potential for interstate conflict. There are a lot of impoverished populations. There are a lot of vested groups, a lot of interest groups, there are a lot of ethnic groups. that have formed, non-state entities by themselves. There are a lot of people who are, are fighting for entities. There are a lot of people who are, very concerned about religious and, religious affinities and those kind of things. So I think, our region is a complex mix of nations, peoples, ethnicities, problems, both that are recent and some that have been carried forward from history. And it doesn't help that, we're also a region that is blessed heavily with resources, oil resources. So we undoubtedly have, the potential of being a hotspot for terrorism, non-state actors and all of that. But we also have a lot of riches which bring the international gain to us. There's a lot of international presence. It's a very challenging environment in which we reside as an India that is growing and that is focusing a lot on its internal development and needs to, engage the rest of the world. It's also a very challenging geography in which the Indian Navy is deployed now because, much of what I said can describe the whole arc which goes from the Indian coast to the Makran coast, the Iranian coast, into the entire Gulf, comes down to the Oman Yemenis coast, and all the way down to, the East African coast. So it's a complex geography. There are people who have various kinds of problems. There are nations that have various kinds of problems. There are nations that are carrying animosities from historical times. There is international interests, there are extra-regional interests, and that is where the Navy, has to operate every single day. For the last maybe 20 or 25 years, right from the time of the global war on terror, we had something like 20 or 25 navies always positioned in the North Arabian Sea in strength. The count at the peak of it, it went to something like 90 or 100 international vessels being positioned there. Today we've got something like 50 vessels. So there is a lot of international interest. This is a region which exports a lot of its commodities to other regions. A lot of other regions are dependent. A lot of import dependent countries, import dependent economies are dependent on the stability of the Indian Ocean region because there is that. So there is a lot of mix of trade, 2 points, geopolitics, international interests, impoverished populations, a mix of state and non-state actors. It's very complex and muddy, and that's where we operate. So I think these are interesting times. How we're going to evolve, we don't know. But this evolution process has started 50 or 60 years from 50 or 60 years back. We continue to evolve. We certainly see this war as some kind of inflection point. We can talk about it if we want. Because this is unprecedented, and my own guess is that being some kind of a small street of international politics, the world is going to change very very significantly after the war. I don't know how it's going to end, when it will end, but certainly the way we see international institutions, we see the established global order, we see established nation states, we see alliances that are so predominant in international relations these days. We see much of that changing, and we're going to see the emergence of a new order where we're going to new people, we're going to new formations, new alliances, and we be unwise not to recognize what's happening and position ourselves correctly as India, as a nation that's growing in stature, that's growing in economy, that's growing in international politics, that's growing in its own aspiration, that's growing in self-image. So we need to position ourselves correctly so that this war is over and everything settles, we find ourselves in a position of advantage.
So you brought out 2 or 3 wonderful things. You said this is an inflection point, and you also said we can talk about it if you want. I mean, I'm not going to look at gift horse in the so we certainly would like to talk about it because your perspectives on that are important. And there's a reason I asked this last question is because at the end of the day, Max City is about geopolitics. We wanted to bring geopolitics to Mumbai, geopolitical discussions to Mumbai. So we'll be more than happy to hear about your take on how this war is sort of changing some of the way, whether it's reordering international relations or the international world order, or it has certain operational lessons in terms of technology and other things. So I'll be happy to hear more if you would like to delineate a bit more.
So certainly, this is a very dynamic world that we live in now. The contours of what the world might be maybe 10 years from now or something we don't know. But what we certainly know that what we certainly know is the relationship between the United States and NATO, for example, is being challenged, and that needs to be sorted out at the end of this war. Uh, the the relationship among the Gulf countries itself is being challenged in a way. They had a certain model, even if it was an uneasy peace. There was peace. Now that how that's going to turn out, we don't know. India's relationship with the United States, with Israel, with Iran, we've kept them all as friends. We want to continue to be friends with all of them. How we, managed to do that after the war is going to be a challenge. The economies of plenty of countries now, we are having the Russia-Ukraine war that has entered its fifth year. Europe, the whole of Europe has been heavily invested in it in terms of soldiering, in terms of technology, in terms of weapons, sensors, in terms of making contributions. That war has gone nowhere. This war has come on the heels of that war. So there are a lot of international investments that are going into fighting wars. If this war should be inconclusive, like we think it would be, because there are no easy answers, there's going to be no clear winner or loser in this war as it is today, then, a lot of resource will have been spent with no significant outcome. That is the first bit. The second bit is the war has disrupted normal international commerce. So I'm afraid that's so important for the world economy. So there's a lot of nations that will inevitably suffer because of the disruption. The Gulf countries alone, in the case, they all import dependent. They are a single commodity economy. They need to export. They're not able to export. They import everything that they use in the daily lives. They're not able to import as well. This is a short term. This is at the moment it's just been a month. They should continue for a month or two more. Then, with the disruption reach a level where they find it very, very difficult to bounce back, we don't know. How long the repercussions of this are going to be, we don't know. What we do know is that plenty of economies are going to suffer. How they're going to regroup, and how they're going to do that, we don't know. In the meantime, plenty of international alliances. President Trump has made a door of peace. He's just gathering people like that. There are a lot of unseemly people who are jumping onto that bandwagon. They don't seem to be natural aligned, but they're all opportunistic. They're getting there to find an opportunity to sort it out. How that is going to pan out, we don't know. President Trump, when he finishes his tenure, how that will end and where will that end, we don't know. Certainly, there are a lot of uncertainties about the current situation. Much of it is evolving. We don't know what direction it's going to take. But what we do know now is that plenty of our assumptions on international geopolitics, international trade, have been challenged now. We need to be very, very sensible to be through and give that the correct direction. It's very easy for a miscalculation, miscommunication, misreading of the situation to lead us to a different path. But certainly, I think much of how international politics has been connected for the last 5 or 6 decades, the established order, all of that is coming a great challenge. The whole concept of freedom of navigation, as mariners, the whole concept of freedom of navigation, the global commons, that has come under challenge. So how do we re-establish that? How do we re-establish a multilateral organization that can sort out the conflict between the global good and national interests? Here there's a big challenge. There's a big conflict between the global good and national interests. If everybody continues to follow the national interests, then who will think about the global good? And how do we re-establish the faith of people on multilateral organizations? The multilateral organizations haven't done anything to either cap the conflict or contain the conflict or stop the conflict. So the international organizations in which we have been invested for 5 or 6 or 7 decades, they haven't been able to shape the conflict the way they want. The conflict has gathered a life of its own. So it's all challenging. So that's why I think it's, sometimes all of us, when all of this is done and over with, we need to sit and find out where we are and figure out a new direction we've got to go. History, of course, is not just a region, but the entire world.
I can't do anything by way of summing because I think he's spoken about everything and yet leaves us wanting ye dil mange more, But all good things have to sort of come to an end. If there is one takeaway amongst the wonderful things that he talked about, I think if there's one takeaway, sir, that we'd like to do, I think it was the way you told everyone that it is their Navy, it's your Navy, as much as it's our. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have lots of reasons to be proud of our Navy, exemplified in some ways by elements of that.